Claire never imagined that an ordinary dinner could turn into the last moment she would share with her husband, Ethan. The evening began quietly, with the aroma of her favorite pasta filling the kitchen and their soft laughter echoing throughout the apartment. Ethan had come home early from work, which was unusual, and Claire took it as a good sign. At 7 months pregnant, she struggled to find comfort, but the excitement of expecting their first child outweighed any discomfort. "How about we finally choose a name tonight?" Claire asked with a weary smile, caressing her belly. Ethan looked at her and smiled back, though his eyes revealed something more, a subtle tension that Claire couldn't quite pinpoint. "What do you think of Logan?" he replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I like how it sounds, strong but sweet." Claire felt a lump in her throat. In those little moments, Ethan was the man she had fallen in love with, attentive, caring, and always eager to envision a bright future together. However, those displays of affection had become less frequent in recent months. There was something about Ethan that had changed. He was distracted, and the long nights spent at work meetings had become routine. That night, the atmosphere grew oddly tense when her phone rang on the table. Ethan glanced at it for a moment, as if deciding whether to answer or not. Finally, he picked it up, and his expression hardened upon seeing the name on the screen. "I have to take this." His voice, although gentle, had an urgency that Claire couldn't ignore. He stood up from the table and answered in the hallway, out of Claire's reach. She remained still, trying not to let her own insecurities take over. Was it just work? Or was there something more? When Ethan returned, his face was pale and his smile forced. "I'm sorry, love. I need to step out for a moment. I promise this will be the last time I have to do this." Claire tried to smile, though a sense of emptiness weighed heavily in her chest. It wasn't the first time he had left unexpectedly, but something about this goodbye felt different. Ethan hugged her tightly, as if he wanted to say something more, but he just murmured, "I love you, Claire. When I return, everything will be fine." The door closed behind him, leaving Claire alone in the silent apartment, feeling anxiety swell within her. She tried to distract herself, telling herself not to worry. Ethan always came back, even if it was late. But as the hours passed, her anxiety twisted into a knot of fear. At midnight, her heart began to race. She called him several times, but the phone went straight to voicemail. The early hours dragged on slowly and heavily, like a bad omen. Each minute that passed without news was a stab of anguish in her chest. Finally, when the clock struck 4 in the morning, the sound of the doorbell shattered the oppressive silence of the apartment. "Claire Fernandez," said a male voice on the other side of the door. It was a police officer. Claire's world came to a halt. She barely heard the words that followed. Accident, cliff, explosion. Her mind went blank as she tried to process the impossible. Ethan's car had gone off a cliff and exploded upon impact with the rocks. There was no body to recover. All they found were charred remains and some personal belongings. Claire dropped to her knees, feeling the ground disappear beneath her. Reality hit her with unbearable brutality. Ethan was dead. There would be no goodbyes, no last words, no explanations. Just an unyielding void. The emotional impact triggered premature contractions. Physical pain intertwined with emotional anguish as they rushed her to the hospital. Each breath felt like a titanic effort, and amidst the cold lights of the operating room, Claire felt everything she had loved crumble in an instant. "Hold on, Claire. You have to do this for your baby," a nurse said, gripping her hand. Amidst the chaos and pain, Logan was born prematurely, struggling to breathe and whisked away to the intensive care unit. Claire saw him for just a moment before they took him away, a tiny, fragile baby dependent on machines for breath. That image etched itself in her mind as loneliness enveloped her in the cold hospital room. Ethan wasn't there to hold her or to see their son. There were no arms to comfort her, no promises of a future together. only the empty echo of a life that had shattered into 1,000 pieces. The constant beeping of machines filled the neonatal intensive care unit where Logan fought for each breath. From the other side of the glass, Claire watched as doctors and nurses monitored her son, a baby so small and fragile that he seemed to vanish among the tubes and wires. Her body was exhausted, but her mind could find no rest. The blend of physical and emotional pain trapped her in a state of shock. Each second without Ethan felt like an endless chasm. With a blanket over her shoulders, Claire sat in a hospital chair day and night, refusing to leave until Logan showed signs of improvement. Without Ethan, she felt utterly alone at a moment when she needed his support the most. Every glance from the nurses, laden with compassion, reminded her that her husband was gone. But Claire refused to crumble. Logan needed her, and if he was fighting for his life, she would too. Days passed slowly, and hospital visits became her only routine. It was during one of those visits, while signing some medical documents, that Derek, Ethan's brother, appeared unexpectedly. Dressed impeccably and wearing a serious expression, he approached Claire as if the tragedy were just another formality in his life. "Claire, I'm so sorry for what happened." His voice was soft, but there was an underlying coldness that made her uncomfortable. "I want to help you with the legal matters. Now that Ethan is gone, we need to ensure everything is in order, especially for Logan's sake." Claire, weakened by the situation, could barely muster a response. Derek dropped a folder full of documents on the table. "I need you to sign these papers. It's just to protect Logan's interests and ensure nothing in the company is compromised." Although Derek's words sounded reasonable, Claire felt a slight chill. There was something in his tone, an urgency disguised as concern, that stirred unease within her. Ethan had mentioned his brother only a few times, always describing him as pragmatic and ambitious, someone hard to read. But Claire never imagined that ambition could extend beyond business, especially in a moment of grief like this. "Derek, I'm not in a position to understand any of this right now. Can't it wait a little?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's better to do this sooner rather than later. I don't want you to worry about anything else, Claire," Derek insisted, with a smile that felt too rehearsed. Exhausted and vulnerable, Claire took the pen and signed the papers without reading them. She trusted that Derek, being Ethan's brother, only wanted to help her. But deep down, a small voice told her that something was off. Still, she decided to silence her suspicions. With her husband dead and her son in critical condition, she had no strength to question Derek's intentions. When Logan finally showed signs of improvement, Claire felt a momentary relief. The day they brought him to his room for the first time, she held him in her arms for hours, crying silently. He was the only thing she had left of Ethan, the last connection to the man she had loved. However, the joy of Logan's recovery was overshadowed by the constant shadow of uncertainties. The nights were the hardest. Ethan's absence felt more palpable, and the memories of their last night together haunted her relentlessly. Why had he needed to leave that night? What had that call contained that had upset him so much? The unanswered questions began to gnaw at her from within, leaving a sense of emptiness that no consolation could fill. Each time Claire tried to recall the details of Ethan's conversation that night, something felt off. There was an unease in his words, a tone of farewell that she hadn't understood at the time. Did Ethan know something was going to happen? And why was Derek so eager to handle the legal matters? The weeks turned into a heavy and painful routine. Logan needed constant care, and Claire dedicated herself entirely to her son. However, small details about Ethan's death kept circling in her mind. Every time she tried to talk to Derek about the accident, he would change the subject or tell her not to torment herself further. "There's nothing else to investigate, Claire. You need to focus on Logan," Derek would say coldly, as if he wanted to bury the truth along with the supposed remains of his brother. One afternoon, while Claire was going through the few belongings Ethan had left at home, she found his personal planner. It was a simple object, but as she flipped through it, she noticed the last pages were torn out. A chill ran down her spine as she realized something was missing. What had Ethan written in those last pages? And who had torn them out? With each passing day, the questions piled up. The pieces of the puzzle didn't fit. Why were there no remains of Ethan's body? Why was Derek so anxious for her to sign those documents without giving her time to understand what was happening? And most troubling of all, why did she feel deep down that Ethan wasn't really dead? Claire tried to ignore her suspicions, telling herself it was just her mind seeking answers where there were none. But she couldn't shake the feeling that everything that had happened that night was shrouded in a veil of lies. And worst of all, she had no idea how to uncover the truth. All she knew was that something didn't add up, and sooner or later, she would discover what really happened. The pain of losing Ethan was still present, but little by little, that pain transformed into a silent determination. She had to protect Logan, but she also had to protect herself. Something told her not to trust Derek completely, and the idea that Ethan might have hidden secrets from her became increasingly hard to ignore. Time moved like a slow and relentless tide. 10 years after Ethan's death, Claire had rebuilt her life as best as she could, though the scars of her loss remained. Logan, now a 10-year-old boy, was her greatest source of joy, but also a constant reminder of what she had lost. Every gesture and smile from the boy reflected fragments of his father, making each day a blend of love and nostalgia. Claire and Logan lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, very different from the house they once shared with Ethan. She had grown accustomed to a simpler life, working as an administrative assistant at a small company. Though her job wasn't thrilling, it provided the stability she needed to raise her son alone. Her daily routine was predictable: work, school, and afternoons at home with Logan, who filled their home with questions and energy. Logan had always been a curious child, and as he grew older, his questions became sharper. Although Claire tried to keep Ethan's memory alive by telling stories about his father, there were questions she avoided answering. "Why did we never find Dad's body?" Logan asked one day while they were looking through a photo album together. Claire felt a lump in her throat but smiled gently. "Sometimes life doesn't give us all the answers, sweetheart. What's important is that your dad loved you very much." Logan didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Still, his curiosity remained alive. He was an intelligent boy, with an innate ability to sense when something didn't add up. Although Claire tried hard to shield him from the incomplete truth, it became increasingly difficult to hide the gaps in the story. At home, memories of Ethan lingered in the form of framed photos, small objects, and the stories Logan had memorized over the years. But there were moments when Claire felt that those memories, instead of comforting her, were like ghosts binding her to a past that had never fully closed. Ethan's accident still haunted her, like an unsolved mystery that her heart refused to let go of. One day, Logan was selected to participate in a soccer tournament in a nearby town. The idea of a little trip excited both mother and son. Claire wanted Logan to have the happiest childhood possible, filled with joyful and normal moments, away from the shadows of his past. They prepared everything with enthusiasm, and the next day took the train to the town, enjoying their time together. The tournament was a success. Logan played with energy and joy, and Claire cheered him on from the stands, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. After the event, they decided to explore a bit of the town, walking along the main avenue under the afternoon sun. They stopped at a small cafe to rest, with Logan devouring an ice cream and Claire enjoying a coffee. It was at that moment when everything changed. Logan was looking out the window absent-mindedly when his expression suddenly shifted. His eyes widened, and he dropped his spoon onto the floor. "Mom," he whispered, a tone of surprise and fear in his voice. "It's Dad." Claire followed his gaze and felt the world stop. Through the glass, she saw a man walking casually on the opposite sidewalk. She gasped as she recognized that the man had the same build, the same gait, and the same expression in his eyes as Ethan. For a moment, she thought it was an illusion, a cruel trick of her mind. But then she saw him more clearly, and the impact was like a direct blow to the chest. Walking alongside him was a tall, elegant woman with long, dark curls, holding the hand of a small girl. The three were laughing and chatting as if they were a happy family, as if that life Claire had dreamed of had never existed. Every gesture from that man, every smile, screamed to her that this was no coincidence. It was Ethan, the same Ethan she had loved and lost 10 years ago. Claire felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. How could he be alive? Why was he there, with another family, as if she and Logan had never existed? Logan, breathless, looked at her for an explanation, but Claire had none. "Is it him, Mom? Is it Dad?" Logan asked, his eyes filled with confusion and hope. Claire, paralyzed by panic, could only nod weakly. There was no doubt, it was Ethan. Claire felt a mix of anger, pain, and bewilderment. She wanted to run to Ethan, confront him, and demand answers, but something inside her held her back. What if there was a dangerous reason behind all this? What if the truth was even more devastating than she imagined? For Logan's sake, she decided to stay calm, at least for now. "Let's follow them, sweetheart. But you have to promise me you won't make a sound or say anything, okay?" she told Logan, gripping his hand tightly. The boy nodded, and together they left the cafe, keeping their distance as they followed Ethan and his new family. Claire tried to control her emotions, but each step brought her closer to a truth she feared to uncover. They followed them down several streets until they saw them enter a nearby bookstore. Claire watched from outside, noticing how the little girl clung to Ethan's arm with complete trust. This man wasn't just a distant version of Ethan. He was the same Ethan, living a new life as if everything that had come before never existed. After a few minutes, Ethan and his new family exited the bookstore and walked toward an upscale neighborhood filled with large, elegant houses. Claire and Logan followed them until they saw them enter a house with a garden. From across the street, they watched as the woman released the girl, who happily ran to Ethan and hugged him. The scene was too perfect, too painful. Claire felt a pang in her heart. How could it be that Ethan, the man she had mourned for 10 years, was there, alive and happy with another family? Logan squeezed his mother's hand tightly, not understanding what was happening. "Why is he with them, Mom? Why isn't he with us?" Logan asked, his eyes filled with tears. Claire had no answers. All she knew was that something very dark lay behind that idyllic scene, and she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. Claire felt her legs tremble as she watched Ethan from a distance. It was surreal. The man she had loved, cried for, and mourned as dead for 10 years was right in front of her, as if the tragedy that had marked her life had never happened. But what disturbed her most was the sight of him with another woman and a little girl, forming a family that looked perfect. The scene shattered everything Claire had believed to be true for the past decade. "Mom, that's Dad, right?" Logan asked, his voice trembling as he stared at Ethan. Claire didn't know how to respond. She squeezed her son's hand and took a deep breath, trying to find words. "Yes, sweetheart, it looks like him, but we need to find out what's going on." The steps of Ethan, the woman, and the girl led them through the streets of the upscale neighborhood. Claire decided to follow them without being seen, keeping her distance to avoid drawing attention. Logan, although confused, silently obeyed, but she could feel the tremor in his hand and the agitation in his breath. The boy had just seen his father, the man he believed was dead, walking as if nothing had happened, without a sign of life for years. They stopped when they saw Ethan and his new family enter a small bookstore. Claire watched from outside, feeling her heart race. She saw them pick out books, laugh, and talk like a happy family. The normalcy with which Ethan interacted with them was what disturbed her the most. It was as if the life he and Claire had shared had never existed. Claire felt a mix of fury and sadness. How could he have abandoned her like that? How could he live another life, leaving Logan behind without an explanation? Every second spent watching that family felt like a stab to her soul. When they left the bookstore, Claire followed them until they arrived at a large, elegant house in an exclusive neighborhood. From across the street, Claire and Logan saw Ethan open the door, and the little girl ran to him, hugging him joyfully. The woman, with a relaxed smile, followed them into the house. From the outside, it looked like a perfect home. Logan tightened his grip on his mother's hand, his mind filled with unanswerable questions. "Why is Dad with them, Mum? Why didn't he ever come back to us?" he asked, his voice breaking. Claire looked at him, feeling her heart break at the confusion and pain in her son's eyes. She had no answers either, but she knew she couldn't ignore what she had seen. "I don't know, Logan, but we're going to find out." Claire knew she had to act cautiously. What if there was a dangerous reason behind Ethan's disappearance? Fear crept into her thoughts. If Ethan had been hiding all these years, perhaps he had been forced to do so. Maybe their lives and Logan's were in danger if she approached without a clear plan. But she couldn't keep ignoring what she had witnessed. As they walked back to the hotel, Claire's head spun. Each step away from that house was a mix of relief and anguish. How would she explain this to Logan? How would she deal with the torrent of emotions threatening to consume her? She knew she would need help to unravel this nightmare. That night, after putting Logan to bed, Claire stayed awake in the small hotel room. She had to find answers, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. She took her phone and searched for the number of Gabriel, her old friend and private investigator. He was the only person she trusted enough to ask for help in a moment like this. "Gabriel, I need your help." Her voice trembled as she spoke. "It's about Ethan. I think he's alive." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Gabriel responded, surprised. "Ethan? How is that possible?" Claire explained what she had seen, how Ethan was living with another family and seemed to have forgotten everything about his previous life. Gabriel, although skeptical at first, promised to investigate and find out the truth. He knew that if Ethan had disappeared and adopted another identity, there was something darker behind it all. Claire stayed awake late into the night, unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of Ethan laughing with the girl and the woman, as if his previous life had never existed. How could he have done this? Anger and pain mixed within her, but above all, there was the desperate need to protect Logan. As she watched her son sleep, Claire promised herself that she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the whole truth. She couldn't let the past trap her again without answers. She had to confront Ethan, no matter what that meant. And this time, she wouldn't leave with doubts. The clock struck 2 in the morning when she finally allowed herself to close her eyes, knowing that the next day would be just the beginning of an investigation that could change their lives forever. The following days were a mix of anxiety and waiting. Gabriel had started his investigation with the promise of getting to the bottom of the mystery, but Claire knew that uncovering the truth would require time and patience. Every minute that passed without news made her feel like she was walking on a tightrope. Logan, though young, sensed his mother's nervousness, and even though he said nothing, Claire noticed the shadow of worry in his eyes. Finally, one night, Gabriel called. The detective's deep voice on the other end of the line confirmed that his findings would be devastating. "Claire, I need you to come to my office. This is more complicated than I imagined." Claire's heart raced as she drove to Gabriel's office. She knew that what she was about to hear would change her life forever. Upon arrival, Gabriel greeted her with a serious look, surrounded by documents, photos, and clippings he had gathered during his investigation. They sat in silence for a moment before he began. "Ethan is alive, Claire." The statement was direct, without preamble. Claire felt the air leave her lungs, even though she had suspected it already. "I know. I saw him with my own eyes. But Why? How is it possible that he just disappeared and started another life? Gabriel took a deep breath and handed her some photos. In them, Ethan appeared with the woman Claire had seen, Vanessa Rivas, and the girl who seemed to be his daughter. There were also images of Fernando Rivas, a businessman notoriously linked to organized crime. Ethan didn't disappear by choice, Claire. He was forced to fake his death by the Crimson Circle, a criminal organization led by Fernando Rivas. Gabriel pointed to a series of financial documents. Ethan refused to participate in a money laundering scheme with his family's business. His brother Derek betrayed him and turned him over to Fernando. The only way to protect you and Logan was to disappear. Gabriel's words echoed in Claire's mind. Ethan had died to protect them, but he had also abandoned them. He had started a new life with Vanessa, the daughter of the criminal who held him captive. The image of Ethan as both a victim and a perpetrator left her paralyzed. "Why didn't he contact us?" Claire asked in a whisper. "Fernando kept him under surveillance the whole time. If he got close to you, it would have put you in danger," Gabriel replied gravely. "Ethan has lived under Vanessa's control for these 10 years. The bitterest revelation was Derek's betrayal, Ethan's brother. He had used his brother's disappearance to control the family business and leave Claire in a vulnerable position. All the help Derek had offered her after Ethan's death had been nothing but a facade to consolidate his power. Claire felt a mix of rage and helplessness. She had trusted him, signed documents without questioning, believing he only wanted to help her. "Why didn't I see it sooner?" Claire whispered, more to herself than to Gabriel. "You couldn't have known. Everything was orchestrated to look like an accident. No one would have suspected." Gabriel leaned toward her, his gaze firm. "The important thing now is to decide what you're going to do. We know Ethan is alive and trapped, but if we try to pull him out of that life, we put not just him, but also Logan at risk." Claire remained silent, staring at the photos on the table. The truth was even worse than she had imagined. Ethan hadn't just disappeared. He had been forced to create a new life under threats. And the most painful part was that he had done it to protect her and their son. Could she hate him for that? Could she forgive him? "I'm going to confront him. I need to hear it from his mouth," she finally said, her voice steady. "Claire, if you approach Ethan recklessly, Vanessa will know. We don't know how she will react, and that woman is dangerous," Gabriel warned. "I know, but I can't keep living with this uncertainty. I need to know the complete truth, face to face, and I need to protect Logan." Gabriel nodded, although his expression showed concern. "Let me help you. We need to do this as safely as possible. I'm going to investigate more about Vanessa and Fernando Rivas. If Ethan is in danger, we are too. We can't afford to make a mistake." Back in her apartment, Claire felt like she was carrying an even heavier burden than before. She knew that reuniting with Ethan would be painful, but she also understood that she couldn't postpone it. She had lived 10 years with unanswered questions, and she could no longer bear to stay in the dark. Logan had the right to know the truth, and so did she. Claire stayed awake that night, replaying every detail in her mind. She knew that what she was about to do would change her life forever, but she was ready, no matter what she discovered or how painful the truth was. This time, she wouldn't stop until she understood why Ethan had faked his death and lived a lie for so many years. The next day, Gabriel sent her a message confirming he had found the perfect opportunity for Claire to meet Ethan. Every day, he visited a small cafe near his work, always alone. It was his only moment of solitude, away from Vanessa's constant surveillance. "It's now or never, Claire. If you want answers, this is the moment," Gabriel told her over the phone. "I'm going to do it," she replied without hesitation. The die was cast. Claire knew that the meeting with Ethan could break her completely or provide the answers she desperately needed. But there was no turning back. She had to confront him, even if it meant unearthing secrets that could change their lives forever. The moment had arrived. Claire, her heart racing, walked toward the small cafe where Ethan usually stopped every morning. Gabriel had dropped her off a few blocks away to avoid raising suspicion, but his warning echoed in her mind. Be careful. We don't know how far Vanessa's control over Ethan reaches. The weight of 10 years of uncertainty, pain, and repressed love accumulated with every step she took toward the cafe door. She knew that once she crossed that threshold, her life would change forever. Claire entered the cafe and spotted him immediately. Ethan was sitting in a corner, alone, staring blankly into his coffee cup. He looked older, with a more tired face and worry lines etched on his forehead, but he was still him, the man she had loved. For a moment, Claire froze, watching him from a distance. The urge to run to him, to confront him about the lost years, was almost unbearable. But she knew she couldn't let her emotions take over. She took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and walked toward his table. Ethan looked up as she approached. At first, he didn't recognize her, but when their eyes finally met, his expression changed completely. Fear, surprise, and guilt reflected on his face, as if he had just seen a ghost. "Hello, Ethan." Claire's voice was soft but firm. Ethan opened his mouth to say something but couldn't articulate a word. The cup in his hand trembled slightly, and he set it down carefully, as if every movement required monumental effort. The weight of reality had crashed down on him. "I thought you were dead," Claire said, staring at him, trying to keep calm. "I cried for you for 10 years. Logan did too." Ethan lowered his gaze, unable to hold the guilt in those familiar eyes. "I can't tell you how sorry I am, Claire," he finally murmured, his voice filled with remorse. "I had no other choice." Ethan began to explain. He told her how he had been forced by the Crimson Circle to fake his death to protect her and Logan. Derek had betrayed him by refusing to participate in Fernando Rivas's money laundering scheme. He had been given 2 options: disappear forever or risk the lives of Claire and their son. "I couldn't put you in danger. I faked my death because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe," Ethan said, tears in his eyes. "I believed that the only way to protect you was to stay away." Claire felt a mix of anger and sadness. What Ethan was saying made sense, but it couldn't erase the pain that she and Logan had experienced all those years. "And the new family?" Claire asked, unable to contain herself. "How could you form another life? Did you forget that Logan and I existed?" Ethan shook his head, desperate to explain himself. "It's not what it looks like. Vanessa, she didn't give me a choice. She has kept me a prisoner for these years. That girl isn't my daughter, and Vanessa was never my wife out of love. It was a forced marriage, part of the agreement with her father to keep me under control." Ethan's words felt like an emotional slap. Claire didn't know what to feel. On one hand, she understood that he had been trapped, but on the other, he had built a new life without them. The weight of betrayal still pressed on her chest. Ethan leaned toward Claire, his gaze filled with urgency. "Vanessa doesn't know you're here, but if she finds out, we're in danger. She's not just a jealous woman. She's dangerous. She has eyes everywhere. Please, Claire, you have to stay away from me for your safety and Logan's." But Claire was no longer the vulnerable woman she had been 10 years ago. She had survived the pain of losing him, raised Logan alone, and now that she knew the truth, she wasn't going to back down. "No, I'm not going to keep staying away, Ethan. We're going to get through this together, you, Logan, and me." Ethan shook his head, fear clearly reflected in his eyes. "It's not that simple. If we try to escape, Vanessa will find us. She has resources and people watching me all the time. I can't risk something happening to you." Claire placed her hands on the table, looking directly into his eyes. "Then we'll fight. I'm going to protect Logan, and you will too. We can't keep running from her forever. Gabriel has proof of the Crimson Circle's activities. If we bring it to light, we can take her down." Ethan looked at her in silence for a few seconds. Finally, something changed in his expression. Resignation gave way to a spark of hope. For the first time in a long while, he seemed to find purpose. "If there's a way out of this, we'll find it," Ethan said, nodding slowly. "But we need to act fast. If Vanessa discovers we've met, she wouldn't hesitate to hurt us." Claire and Ethan agreed that they needed a solid plan. Gabriel would be key to gathering more evidence and creating a strategy to expose the Crimson Circle without putting Logan in danger. They couldn't afford mistakes. Before Claire got up to leave, Ethan took her hand for the first time in 10 years. "Claire, forgive me. I can't get back the lost time, but I want to try. I want to be the man I once was, for you and for Logan." Claire felt tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She squeezed Ethan's hand and nodded. "First, let's get out of this nightmare. Then we'll see what we have left." As Claire left the cafe, the weight of the last 10 years was still there, but now there was a glimmer of hope. She knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, but she was no longer alone. This time, they would fight together. Claire and Ethan parted at the cafe with the silent promise not to give up, even though fear lingered in each of their gestures. They knew that any misstep could be discovered by Vanessa, and if that happened, the consequences would be devastating. Claire returned home with a mix of hope and dread. Logan was at school when she arrived, giving her a few minutes to gather her thoughts. She was trying to process the truth. Ethan had been trapped in a life he didn't choose, forced to leave behind everything he loved. But now they were in this together, and there was no turning back. When Logan came home that afternoon, he looked at her with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. He hadn't mentioned anything further about the day they saw Ethan with another family, but Claire knew that the image remained vivid in his mind, fueling questions he hadn't yet voiced. Unsure of how much to tell him, she hugged him tightly, feeling her heart swell with fierce determination. She wouldn't let anything or anyone tear them apart again. That night, while they were having dinner together, Claire decided to give him a small truth, just enough to ease his anxiety without exposing him to danger. "Logan, I've been looking into what we saw that day," she said softly, searching his eyes. "I need you to trust me, sweetheart. Soon everything will make sense, but until then, I want you to be very attentive and do what I say without asking, okay?" Logan nodded, although his gaze was still filled with questions. He sensed that his mother was hiding something more, but he decided not to press further. He had learned to read Claire's emotions like an open book, and that night he noticed that fear was present, even though she tried to disguise it with smiles. Morning came, and Claire jolted awake. The sound of her phone pulled her from sleep. On the other end of the line was Gabriel, his voice urgent. "Claire, I have bad news. Vanessa has found out that you met with Ethan. Something is not right. I didn't want to scare you, but I think she might try something against Logan." Claire's heart stopped for a second, only to begin beating violently. She sprang out of bed and ran to Logan's room. His bed was empty. The rumpled sheets and the open window were the only signs of what had occurred. Her son had been kidnapped. Despair took over as she frantically searched every corner of the house, even though she knew she wouldn't find him there. Gabriel was right. Vanessa had struck before they could do anything. With trembling hands, she dialed Gabriel's number, who answered instantly. "Logan is gone. They took him." "I figured as much," Gabriel replied somberly. "Don't worry, we'll find him. But don't do anything impulsive. Let's think clearly." Claire couldn't think of anything but her son. Tears threatened to spill, but she knew she couldn't afford to lose her head. Logan needed her now more than ever. She called Ethan, and when he answered, she felt the air return to her lungs. "They took him, Ethan. Vanessa has Logan." The silence on the other end of the line was brief, but heavy with tension. Ethan knew exactly what that meant. Vanessa had crossed a line from which there was no return. "I'm coming over," he finally said. His voice was firm, resolute, with no room for fear. "We're not going to let them hurt him." Within minutes, Ethan was at the apartment. Claire embraced him desperately, but he gently pushed her away, looking her in the eyes. "We're going to get him back, Claire. I promise." Gabriel arrived shortly after, bringing with him a map and details about Fernando Rivas's properties. The most likely place to hide Logan was a mansion on the outskirts of the city, a fortress surrounded by tall walls and armed guards. Vanessa didn't just want to punish Ethan, she wanted to send a clear message. No one defies the Crimson Circle without paying a steep price. "We need to act quickly," Gabriel said, spreading the map on the table. "We can't wait for the police to help us. We need to get in without raising suspicions." "How are we going to do that?" Claire asked, feeling the adrenaline keep her on her feet. "I have a plan," Gabriel replied, "but it will be risky. Ethan and I will enter through the back, while you, Claire, wait outside in the car. If anything goes wrong, I want you to take Logan and get out as fast as you can." Claire shook her head. "I'm not waiting outside. I'm going in with you. Logan is my son, and I won't stay behind." Ethan looked at her with a mix of admiration and concern, but he knew there was no way to convince her otherwise. Claire had come too far to back down now. The plan was set in motion that very night. The mansion was completely silent when they arrived. The exterior lights illuminated the perfectly manicured gardens, but there was no sign of Logan. Gabriel disabled the security cameras with a portable device, giving them precious minutes to move unseen. They entered through a side door, stealthily navigating the dark hallways of the mansion. Each step was a testament to their determination. Claire felt fear trying to overtake her, but her love for her son was stronger. Finally, they reached a locked room. Ethan opened it quickly, and there, in the center of the room, was Logan, with his hands tied but unharmed. The boy looked at them with hopeful eyes. "Mom!" Logan shouted as he ran toward her. Claire hugged him with all her strength, feeling the weight of fear begin to dissipate. But before they could leave, the door swung open. Vanessa was there, a gun in her hand and a cruel smile on her face. "Did you really think you could take him so easily?" she said contemptuously. Ethan stepped in front of Vanessa, determined to protect his family at all costs. The tension in the room was unbearable. A single wrong move could cost them their lives. But before Vanessa could fire, Gabriel appeared behind her and with a swift motion disarmed her. Vanessa fell to the ground, immobilized. The threat had ended, at least for now. With Logan safe in her arms, Claire felt relief wash over her. They had won this battle, but they knew the war was far from over. They left the mansion before the guards could react, leaving danger behind. But now, more than ever, they understood that they would only be safe if they completely dismantled the Crimson Circle. As they drove home, Logan slept in Claire's lap, and Ethan looked at her from the passenger seat. They were together again, and that was their greatest victory. "We're going to destroy them, Claire. This time, we'll end them for good." Claire nodded, feeling that for the first time in years, hope was real. The return home was a moment of relief, but the threat still lingered in the air like a heavy shadow. Logan slept soundly in Claire's arms, exhausted after his rescue, while Ethan watched them from the passenger seat. They had managed to save him, but they knew that Vanessa wouldn't sit idly by. She had lost this battle, but the Crimson Circle was still standing, and as long as that was the case, none of them would be safe. Back in the apartment, Claire carefully laid Logan down, stroking his hair as he murmured something in his sleep. Her son's innocent face was a reminder of why they couldn't give up. This time, they had to root out everything, leaving no loose ends. They couldn't afford to live in fear of the Circle reaching out again. Ethan and Gabriel were waiting in the living room, reviewing the documents and clues they had accumulated. The plan to dismantle the organization required precision and speed. They knew it wasn't just about exposing Vanessa. It was also about taking down her father's empire, Fernando Rivas. If they could leak the right evidence, the legal system and public opinion would do the rest. "We have everything we need," Gabriel said, spreading copies of bank transfers, fake contracts, and bribery lists across the table. documents sufficient to sink the Crimson Circle. But we must act carefully. If we move without a strategy, they could escape or worse, strike before we catch them. Ethan, his face serious and fists clenched, looked at Claire. We have to do it right. No more risks. I almost lost them once, and it won't happen again. Claire held Ethan's gaze and nodded. She had spent too many years suffering in silence. Now she was ready to fight and end this. What do we have to do? She asked, sitting next to them. Gabriel laid out his plan. First, they needed to send the evidence to several reputable journalists, ensuring that the story would break into the public eye with no possibility of censorship. Second, they would need the help of some contacts within the police that Gabriel knew well, people not on the Crimson Circle's payroll. A coordinated attack against the organization had to be executed the same day the evidence was revealed so that no one had time to escape. Time was their greatest enemy. Vanessa already knew that Ethan and Claire were working together, and any suspicious movement could trigger immediate retaliation. They had to act before the organization could react. I'm going to contact the journalist today, Gabriel said, picking up his phone. This story is too big to be ignored. Once the evidence reaches their hands, there will be no turning back. As Gabriel reached out to his sources, Claire and Ethan were alone for the first time since their reunion. The tension between them was palpable, a mix of unresolved emotions threatening to overflow at any moment. I'm so sorry, Claire, Ethan murmured, looking down. Not a day goes by that I don't regret leaving you. I know it was to protect you, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. Claire took a deep breath, fighting against the tears burning in her eyes. She had waited so long to have him back, but the weight of the past still lingered. What matters is that you're here now, she said, her voice low but firm. We can't change what happened, but we can make sure that Logan has a safe future. That's all that matters now. Ethan looked at her with gratitude, but before he could respond, Gabriel's phone vibrated on the table. Ready, Gabriel announced, smiling with satisfaction. The journalists have received the evidence. Tomorrow morning the story will be everywhere. Now we just need to coordinate with the police to ensure that no one escapes. Claire felt a mix of relief and nervousness. The plan was in motion. There would be no turning back. From this moment on, everything would change forever. The next day, chaos erupted like a storm. Headlines flooded the media. Crimson Circle, network of corruption and money laundering exposed. Social media ignited with the news, and public pressure forced authorities to act immediately. Simultaneous raids were carried out at various properties linked to Fernando Rivas, including his main office. As the news spread like wildfire, Gabriel received a message from one of his contacts in the police. Vanessa and Fernando Rivas were attempting to flee the country. The mansion where they had kept Logan was now the focal point for the authorities, but the leaders of the circle remained at large. Claire felt adrenaline flooding her body. They couldn't let them escape. If Fernando and Vanessa managed to leave the country, they would never be safe again. We have to go after them, Ethan said determinedly. I know them. I know where they'll go. It's too dangerous, Gabriel warned, but his voice lacked the strength to stop them. He knew that Ethan and Claire wouldn't back down. They took the car keys and headed for the last place, according to Gabriel's sources, where Vanessa and Fernando were hiding. The chase took them to an old airstrip, where a private jet awaited to take them out of the country. When they arrived, adrenaline surged. Vanessa stood next to the plane, holding a suitcase with a cold fury on her face. Fernando was hurriedly giving orders to his pilot, trying to escape before it was too late. Not this time, Ethan shouted, stepping out of the car. Claire and Gabriel followed him, moving toward them with determination. Vanessa saw them approaching and pulled out a gun, but Gabriel was quicker. With a precise shot, he disarmed her, letting the gun fall to the ground. Fernando raised his hands in surrender, but Claire felt no satisfaction. The damage they had caused couldn't be undone, but at least they knew they wouldn't hurt anyone else again. Police sirens echoed in the distance, and shortly after, officers arrived to arrest Vanessa and Fernando. The empire of the Crimson Circle had finally fallen. Claire allowed herself to exhale for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She looked at Ethan, and for the first time since it all began, she smiled with genuine hope. "It's the end of them," he said, taking her hand. "Now, we can start anew." And for the first time in years, Claire felt that a future without fear was possible. The air felt lighter that night, as if a heavy cloud had finally dissipated. Vanessa and Fernando Rivas had been arrested, and the Crimson Circle, the empire they had built on lies and violence, had collapsed. Claire, Ethan, and Logan returned home with the certainty that, for the first time in 10 years, they could breathe without fear. But even though the danger had passed, the scars of the past remained, invisible yet deep. Logan fell asleep in the back seat of the car, exhausted after the chase and rescue. Claire and Ethan watched him from the front seat, each lost in their thoughts. They had won this battle, but the price they paid was high. They had lost a decade together, and now they had to face the aftermath of everything they had endured apart. When they arrived at the apartment, Claire carried Logan in her arms and laid him in his bed. She settled him carefully, as if she wanted to protect him even in his dreams. Looking at him sleep, she felt relief wash over her, but also the unresolved questions lingering in her mind. How does one rebuild a family after so many years of pain? Could the three of them find a way into the future? In the living room, Ethan stood staring at the pictures on the walls. Images of Logan growing up without him, moments he had missed. The guilt still weighed on his shoulders, but he also felt a new hope. He was back, and this time, he wouldn't leave. "Can I offer you a coffee?" Claire asked, breaking the silence as she entered the room. "Of course," Ethan replied, a small smile revealing how much he had missed these everyday gestures. They sat at the small kitchen table, and for a moment, enjoyed the silence. It was a different silence than the one that had filled the last 10 years. It was no longer heavy with absence or uncertainty, but filled with unspoken promises and the possibilities of a future to be built. "It's not going to be easy, is it?" Ethan murmured, breaking the silence. Claire looked at him, and though there was pain in his eyes, there was also determination. "No, it won't be, but what matters is that we're here, together." Ethan took a sip of his coffee, thinking of the words he wanted to say. There was so much to explain, so many apologies to offer, but the words felt insufficient. Claire, as if she could read his thoughts, gently interrupted him. "You don't have to say anything now. What matters is that we're going to find a way to move forward. For Logan, for us." Ethan nodded, touched by the strength of the woman before him. She had survived alone for so long, facing pain and loss, and now she was inviting him to be part of her life again, unconditionally and without reproach. That night, for the first time in a long time, Claire slept deeply, without the shadow of the past lurking. Beside her, Logan breathed peacefully, and Ethan remained awake in silence, watching his family with a heart full of gratitude. He had lost so much time, but he still had everything to gain. The following days were a mix of adjustments and conflicting emotions. Logan, although happy to finally have his father back, was still reserved. 10 years without him had left a mark. The boy was trying to understand how Ethan fit into his life, and although he loved him, it was hard to fully open up again. Ethan, for his part, was striving to make up for lost time. Every morning, he took Logan to school, helped him with his homework, and they spent hours playing together in the park. But he knew that trust wasn't built overnight. He had to win his son's heart again. One afternoon, while they were building a playhouse in the garden of the apartment, Logan tripped and fell to the ground. Ethan rushed over with his heart in his throat, but before he could say anything, Logan looked up at him and with a shy smile said, "I'm okay, Dad. It's nothing." Ethan felt his heart melt. For the first time, Logan had called him Dad without hesitation. It was a small step, but an important one toward reconciliation. Over time, Claire and Ethan began to find a new rhythm in their relationship. There were difficult moments, days when the past felt too heavy to ignore, but there were more good moments than bad. They learned to laugh together again, to trust each other, and to enjoy the small moments life offered them. One day, while they were walking in the park with Logan, Ethan took Claire's hand. She looked at him in surprise, but then smiled and intertwined her fingers with his. It was a simple gesture, but it was laden with meaning. It was the promise of a new beginning. "Are you ready for this?" Ethan asked softly. "I am," Claire replied, with a smile that reflected everything they had overcome. This time, they were ready to face whatever came their way, together. Days passed like a sigh, and little by little, Claire, Ethan, and Logan began to experience something they thought was lost: normalcy. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments when the past loomed like a persistent shadow, but hope grew stronger each day. However, rebuilding a family after so many years was not easy, and each of them carried invisible scars. Logan, although happy to have his father back, was still trying to find his place in this new dynamic. He had learned to live only with Claire, to rely on his mother as his only stable figure. Now he had to open up again to the idea of having a father, and although he wanted to trust Ethan, there were days when doubts consumed him. One evening during dinner, Logan dropped his utensils and looked at Ethan with eyes full of questions he had held on to for too long. "Why didn't you ever come for me, Dad?" he asked quietly. The silence at the table was absolute. Ethan felt his heart break at hearing his son's voice, filled with vulnerability. He had been expecting that question for a long time, knowing there wouldn't be a perfect answer. "Logan, I never stopped thinking about you or loving you," Ethan replied, his voice choked. "They forced me to leave to protect you. It was the hardest decision I ever had to make, but I did it because I thought it was the only way to keep you and your mother safe." Logan stared at him for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't an answer that could repair the damage, but at least it was the truth. The boy nodded slowly, and without saying anything more, returned to eating. There was much to process, but that moment marked progress, one step closer to reconciliation. Claire watched both of them in silence, feeling how a small but significant barrier began to crumble between them. She knew that the relationship between Logan and Ethan was still under construction, but she also knew that her son had the capacity to forgive. He just needed time, and they would be there to give it to him. Days later, Ethan decided to take Logan to a soccer game, a sport the boy had always been passionate about. They wanted to create new memories together, moments that could solidify the relationship they so longed to build. Claire watched them from a distance as both laughed and played in the park, feeling how happiness, though fragile, began to bloom again. That night, when they returned to the apartment, Logan ran to Claire and hugged her tightly. "Today was one of the best days, Mom," he said, with a genuine smile that lit up his entire face. Ethan, who was standing near the door, looked at Claire with gratitude in his eyes. He knew that this moment wouldn't have been possible without her. Her strength, her unwavering love, had kept everything together when he hadn't been there. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, and in those simple words, Claire felt the weight of everything they had been through together. That night, while Logan slept soundly, Ethan and Claire sat on the apartment terrace, silently gazing at the stars. It was a quiet moment, but it was filled with meaning. For the first time in a long while, they felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for Logan," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Claire looked at him and smiled. "You don't have to thank me. We're a family. We always have been, even though life tried to tear us apart. Now we have another chance." Ethan gently took her hand, and in that simple gesture, they both felt that the past was finally beginning to fade away. It wasn't perfect, and they knew they would still have difficult days, but now they had something they hadn't had in years, the certainty that they were together. The next day, they received unexpected news. Fernando Rivas had been sentenced to a lengthy prison term after the collapse of the Crimson Circle, and Vanessa was sent to jail without bail. The constant fear that had haunted their lives had finally vanished. It was the closure they needed. When Claire told Logan about the sentences, the boy seemed more relieved than she expected. "Does that mean they won't hurt us anymore?" Logan asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. Claire smiled and hugged him. "That means we're safe now, sweetheart. We can start anew, without fear." Logan nodded, and in his gaze there was a light that Claire hadn't seen in years. It was the freedom of a child who could finally live without shadows. That night, while they cooked dinner together, Claire, Ethan, and Logan laughed like never before. They cooked, played, and recalled little anecdotes as if lost time was naturally beginning to be reclaimed. There was no resentment, just a deep gratitude for the second chance that life had given them. Before going to bed, Logan asked for something that surprised both of them. "Can we make a new photo album? I want us to have pictures together, like a family." Claire and Ethan exchanged an excited glance. It was a simple gesture, but it was filled with hope. They were ready to create new memories, to write a new story together. "Of course, son," Ethan replied, with a smile that reflected all the gratitude he felt. "Let's fill it with happy moments." That night, as Logan slept, Claire and Ethan looked into each other's eyes and knew they had found what they had long sought: peace. There were no guarantees that everything would be perfect, but what they had now was enough. They were a family, and that was all that mattered. The sun gently lit the apartment that morning. The curtains fluttered in the breeze, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the small kitchen. Claire lingered in silence for a few seconds, observing the scene. Ethan preparing breakfast, Logan still asleep, and a calm that seemed so fragile and perfect that it was hard to believe it was real. They had survived a decade of secrets, losses, and pain, and now they were there, together, in a place they never thought they would return to. Ethan turned to her with a smile. "Breakfast on the terrace?" "Perfect," Claire replied, returning the smile as she headed to wake Logan. It was an important day, the first time they would go out as a family without fear, without hiding. The weight of everything they had left behind seemed to finally dissipate. Logan opened his eyes slowly as Claire stroked his hair. It took him a few seconds to remember where he was and that everything was all right. Since the rescue, the boy had slept more peacefully, without nightmares or jolts. Claire helped him sit up, and he hugged his mother for a few more seconds, relishing the safety he had missed so much. "Are we going to the park today, Mom?" he asked with a shy smile. "Yes, but first we're having breakfast with Dad on the terrace," Claire replied, kissing him on the forehead. Seeing him so happy and carefree filled her heart with joy. They went down together, and the view from the terrace welcomed them with its warm charm. Ethan had set the table carefully: fresh fruits, toast, juice, and a pitcher of coffee. It was an everyday scene, but for them, it meant so much more. Every shared moment was a victory over the past. "Today is a good day," Ethan remarked as they sat at the table. "A new beginning." Logan nodded enthusiastically, and during breakfast, they talked about everything they would do on their outing to the park. The simplicity of the conversation made the pain of the past feel increasingly distant. After breakfast, Logan went to his room to grab a soccer ball. Claire and Ethan lingered a few more seconds on the terrace, enjoying the breeze and the silence that this moment offered them. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still dreaming," Ethan confessed, gazing at the horizon. "That any moment I'll wake up and all of this will disappear." Claire took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "This is real, Ethan. We're here together, and that's all that matters now." Ethan smiled back at her, and for a moment, the pain he had carried for so many years seemed to dissipate completely. The promise of a future together was no longer just a longing, but a tangible reality. The park was alive with activity. Families strolled, children ran, and laughter echoed among the trees. Claire, Ethan, and Logan walked together along the paths, savoring every minute. Logan's eyes sparkled as he saw the open field where he could play soccer, and it wasn't long before he dashed off, urging his parents to join. Ethan didn't hesitate. Both chased after the ball, laughing like children. Claire watched them from a distance, feeling her heart swell with gratitude. They had traversed chaos, pain, and uncertainty, and now they were building something beautiful. After a while of playing, they sat under the shade of a tree to rest. Logan nestled between them, exhausted but happy, while Ethan affectionately ruffled his hair. It was a moment of peace, one they had longed for so much. They didn't need anything more than to be together. "Mom, do you think we could take a trip, just the three of us?" Logan asked, with the curiosity of a child who had begun to dream again. Claire looked at Ethan, and he nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, son. We can go wherever you want." Logan beamed, excited. For the first time in years, the future didn't frighten him. The past had been left behind, and now he had the freedom to envision a world full of possibilities. That night, back at home, Ethan and Claire contemplated the idea of moving to a new place where they could leave behind the last vestiges of the past and start fresh as a family. A home of their own, built from love and not from shadows. "What do you think about a house by the sea?" Ethan suggested as they browsed some options online together. "I think it's perfect," Claire replied, envisioning Logan running on the beach, free from any fear. Ethan looked at her, and in his eyes there was a silent promise. He would never let anything come between them again. Claire understood him without needing words. They had found their way back to each other, and nothing would pull them off that path. Before going to bed, Logan hugged both of them. "Thank you for not giving up," he murmured, with the innocence and wisdom that only a child can possess. Claire felt tears welling in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, love, and gratitude. They had lost so much, but what they had found was more valuable than anything they had left behind. "We will never give up, son," Ethan replied, hugging Logan tightly. "We're a family. We always will be." And so the night wrapped them in silence as the small family prepared for a new day. The past no longer held power over them, and although they knew that life wouldn't always be easy, they were ready to face whatever came their way, together. They had conquered the shadows of fear and loss. Now they walked toward the light, one day at a time, building a future filled with love, trust, and hope. And thus, their new story began. Lesson. This story reminds us that life is full of unexpected challenges, betrayals, losses, and obstacles, but also of second chances. Through Claire, Ethan, and Logan's journey, we learn that while pain may mark our path, love, patience, and perseverance can heal the deepest wounds. Each character faces trials that push them to their limits, but the key to moving forward lies not in forgetting the past, but in learning from it and in building something new, even when circumstances seem insurmountable. Ethan had to bear the burden of decisions he never wanted to make, while Claire became an unbreakable pillar for her son. Both had to rediscover the meaning of trust and reconnect as a couple and as a family, knowing that forgiveness isn't immediate, but a process that requires effort. Lastly, Logan teaches us that the ability to forgive is a powerful force, even in the youngest hearts. Family isn't defined solely by the absence of conflict, but by the will to stay united, even in the darkest moments. The story shows us that life is unpredictable, but it always offers the chance to start anew if we are brave enough to try. Thank you for joining us in this emotional story of love, sacrifice, and second chances. Life doesn't always take us down the path we expect, but as we saw today, even in the darkest moments, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel if we have the courage to move forward. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that it's always possible to start again, no matter how difficult it may seem. Here, on this channel, we believe that emotions connect us and that every story is an opportunity to learn and grow. See you in the next story. And remember, although the past may hurt, the future is always in our hands.